Well, hello Internet, and welcome to part 7 of my Samsung Mobile SDK tutorial. In this part of the tutorial, I'm going to further explore the Samsung S Pen. We're also going to explore creating toolbars in general in any Android app. I'm also going to cover how to implement settings windows, redo, undo, and how to import images, and a whole bunch of other different things. If you missed part 6 of this tutorial, you might want to take a look at it first because I cover some of these subjects in a more simplistic little application. This guy is going to be quite complex. And of course, this is brought to us because of the Samsung Smart App Challenge that is giving away $1.1 million to up to 12 different winners. There's more information in the description, as well as a way to win a Samsung Galaxy Note 3 or one of 3 Samsung Galaxy Gear smartwatches from me in the description. Okay, so let's take a look at what we're going to do here. Basically, we are going to make a pretty good Paint application. It's going to allow us to click up here and set pen settings and so forth and so on, and strokes and colors. We'll be able to click here and change our eraser settings and the size of our eraser and erase as well as draw. We're also going to be able to undo and redo. On top of that, if we click over here, we're going to be able to access different areas inside of our device or services that we use to store images and go and get those images and look for them and then pick one of them and throw it on our application and draw on it. And this is my daughter's wonderful art, if you were wondering what this is. So, a whole bunch of different things. So let's just jump into the code. And here we go. Very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to handle the layout. So basically we had a whole bunch of buttons in the toolbar. And if you saw part 6, you have a little bit of an idea of exactly how we're going to implement that nice toolbar, as well as the area in which we are going to paint in. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a whole bunch of image views, which are going to represent our buttons in our toolbar, inside of a linear layout. So let's just copy this guy, paste it inside of there, and then we're going to copy this as well, throw that in there. Also, we're going to want to give this an ID, which we're going to put the @ sign to make sure it's created, ID, and we're going to call it Tool Menu. And there's a link to all the code in the description for this video if you want to take a look at it. Match parent is perfectly fine. This, however, I want to be wrap content. And there we go. And that's all we're going to have to do for that linear layout, except for actually closing it. Alright, so now what we need to do is create the image views for our images that are going to represent buttons in our toolbar. So let's just copy this, the ID and the width and the height, and paste that inside of there. The very first thing we have to create here, if you remember what the application looked like, was the pen button. We're going to call that pen button. Leave this match parent, leave this wrap content. We're going to throw in a margin here, layout margin is equal to 1 DIP, Android layout weight. I'm going to give each one of these exactly the same weight, which means that they're going to take up an equal amount of the total space that is available. And then we're also going to use background, because not only is the background going to change for our state, but also we're going to change the foreground or the icon in this situation, which is going to be our pen icon. Background, and I showed you in part 6 how to change the background and foreground images depending upon state, like if they have their pen or finger over top of a button, or if they're pressing it, or whatever. And then Android source is going to be a reference, actually both of these, this guy right here and this guy right here, are both going to be references to an XML file. And then those XML files are going to define what happens depending upon different states that the application is in. So there we are, and then close off image view. And we can bounce over in the graphical layout, see what happens. There you can see. Now you can see the pen tool there. And basically the way this works, I'm not going to type out all this XML. What I'm going to do is just point you towards it and show you what it looks like. So here we have selector tool, and that represents the background and how the background will change depending upon different states. So what we're going to do is we are going to, inside of the drawable folder, this guy right here, we're going to look for selector tool background. And here it is, it's an XML file. Let's open that up. And you can see right here, we are defining the different states that can occur. So like, for example, is this button we're creating, is it currently selected or not, or false? Is it being pressed or not? In this situation, it isn't, false. And then what we're going to do is we're going to change the background if those two states are false to Tool IC Area Center 02, Tool IC Area Center 02. Open that up, and there you can see it is a basic grayed out sort of image, and that's going to represent the background for all our buttons, and this guy's going to get stretched into position. And if you are wondering what the size for all these backgrounds are going to be, they are 22 pixels wide by 46 pixels in height. So this XML file is basically just going to put in the right background depending upon the current state of said button. Alright, so then what we're going to do with the pen, we're going to use selector pen, which is also going to be an XML file. Here it is right here, selector pen. Let's open that up. And all of these are going to be exactly the same. We're just going to use different images. And you can see right here where we are pointing to the actual images. So you can see here, tool IC pen. Just come over here inside of our drawable folder, tool IC pen. We click on that. You're going to see that the default icon for our pen tool is that little paintbrush. And if you were wondering, it is 44 pixels wide by 44 pixels in height. And then depending upon different states, we're going to have like the pen press here, tool IC pen press, there it is. Let's open that up. And there you can see it's in its white incarnation. So that is pretty cool, and that is how we're going to make really interactive buttons inside of our toolbar. So we can close those guys out. And basically we're going to need 5 of these guys, one for each of the different buttons in our toolbar. So 1, 2, that's actually 4, and 5. I think I counted right. We'll find out. Alright, so we got the pen all set up. We need to have an eraser button. Just so you remember, here's our pen button, here's the eraser. Undo, redo, and then the image that's going to allow us to import images onto our screen to draw on. Okay, so this is going to be the eraser button. So eraser button, there it is. And I just want to reiterate that this can be done with any Android app. This isn't a Samsung specific thing. However, I will get into Samsung specific things as the tutorial continues. The background for all these is going to remain exactly the same, which makes a lot of sense. However, there's going to be a selector eraser for that, and that is how everything's going to work out there. We don't need to look at that XML file again. Then the next thing in our toolbar is undo button. Everything's going to stay the same, except this is going to be selector undo. Scroll up. This is going to be a redo button, and then this is going to be selector redo. And then we need one more for our image importing little tool. There that is, and that's going to be background image button. And then this is going to be selector image. And if we save all those and go into the graphical layout, click on it, you're going to see that all of those different guys popped up there. So that's nice. Jump back into the code. Now basically we just have to make room for our frame layout and the relative layout inside of it, which is going to be where we're actually going to be drawing things. So let's just create a frame layout. And it's going to need an ID and a width and a height as well. Pop in there, paste that inside of there. Frame layout is going to be called the S Pen ViewContainer. Have these both be match parent. And then inside of here, we're going to have our relative layout. And it's also going to require an ID as well as width and height. S Pen View Layout. Match parent, have this also be match parent. Close that off, and then close that off. And there we go. That is everything that we're going to need to do for our layout for our application. Now I'm just going to jump in here and start writing some code inside of pensample 5 background.java. Okay, so I just want to go through some of these libraries that we have here. Some of them you've seen in the past, and some of them are brand new. First, we have the unsupported exception we have right here, and basically what this is going to do is just make sure that the device that is running our application supports the Samsung Mobile SDK, as well as different things in regards to whether the S Pen's being used, and the device that's specifically being used, and so forth and so on. We've talked about that a couple times. Then we have the S Pen library, which is basically just going to initialize and verify that the S Pen is available. We have the S Pen NoteDock, which is going to allow us to manage SPD or S Pen data files, and it's going to load and save those SP data files. Basically, it's just going to allow us to add and remove page docs, which we're going to see here in a second, from the NoteDock, which is what we're referring to, as well as attach external files. Then we have the page doc, which we just talked about, which contains all the data and objects in a page, and it's also going to allow us to add, delete, retrieve, change layers, objects, and also provide some general settings that we can use inside of our page document. Then we have History Listener, which is brand new. which is going to allow us to receive history events so that we can use things like undo and redo. Also going to have history update info, which is going to forward history information in regards to undo and redo. We have S Pen Color Picker Listener, which we saw in the last tutorial, which is going to handle changes to the color for the S Pen stroke whenever the user decides to go into settings and change things. Then we have the S Pen Surface View, which is going to allow the user to edit the drawing surface with either their finger or the S Pen, as long as the device supports that action. Here's a brand new guide that's going to allow us to store our eraser settings, and basically what we're going to be storing is the stroke, the thickness, and the eraser type. The S Pen Setting Pen Info is basically going to store the pen settings like color and the pen class name and the thickness, and in some situations the opacity. Then we have the SDKUtils class, which is basically there to handle exceptions that are going to be caused by this exception up here, this guy right here. Basically what we have is we took all of the methods that are going to generate alert dialog boxes if, for example, the device isn't supported or the SDK needs updated or any other problem sort of happens device-wise. The SDKUtils class is going to handle that for us. We have the S Pen Setting Eraser Layout, which is going to provide methods for working with the eraser pop-up dialog boxes. We have S Pen Setting Eraser Layout Event Listener, which is going to handle eraser events. And then finally, we have the S Pen Setting Pen Layout, which we saw in the last tutorial, which is going to provide methods for working with the pen pop-up dialog. So as you can see, there are many libraries going to be used, and there is going to be a lot of things this application is going to do. So it should be fun and also teach a whole lot of different things. One of the first things we're going to have to do here before we actually start creating methods inside of the class is create a private final int and request code select image background. And this guy right here is going to be used to track whenever we jump out of the app and into the gallery and then return a image from the gallery back to the app. So basically what's going to happen is a method called startActivity4Result will be used to call an intent, and it's also going to pass this code so that whenever the activity finishes, which the intent references, this code can then also be returned to onActivityResult and provide us with tracking information so that we know that whenever we leave our application, run an intent to open up the gallery, and then whenever the gallery is finished and it sends an image back, that we understand why it is sending that image back to our application. So that is why this guy here exists. Basically, just for tracking purposes, just to keep things very, very simple. And I accidentally typed that outside of the class. Let's throw it inside of the class here. There we go. All right, so now we have that all set up. Now we need to create our context, which is going to provide us system level information for our application. We're also, of course, going to need our S Pen NoteDock, which is going to hold all of our S Pen page documents. Of course, if we have that, we're going to need our S Pen PageDoc, which is going to hold all the objects that we draw as well as images and so forth that we import. S Pen Surface View, which is going to handle either drawing with the pen or with a finger. The S Pen Setting Pen Layout, which is going to have all our pen settings. And then finally, we're also going to do the same exact thing this time for the eraser. And there we go. Whoops, make sure that we correct our typos. Alright, so now we need to initialize all the images that are going to be used inside of our little toolbar. Private image view, and this is going to be the pen button, and we're going to have 5 of these guys. And we're also going to have the eraser button, the undo button, the redo button, and the background image button. Okay, got those all set up. We want to also store the default tool type, which in this situation is going to be the pen tool. As you saw when the application first ran, the pen tool was used as default. And then we have to come down inside of onCreate and set up the layout. So we're going to say set content view and reference our layout that we created with our toolbar and everything else that we created before. And the name of that is Activity Background. And there's Activity Background, the XML file we created. You need to get the context. We're going to set the S Pen as not being used by default. We're going to later on check if it can be used. We're going to create a new S Pen object. Then we're going to try to initialize the S Pen, but by try, that means that it might fail, so that means we're going to have to throw it inside of a try block. And to test it, we're going to go S Pen package, initialize, and pass it this. Then we're going to say is S Pen feature enabled, and we're going to specifically find out if it is by calling S Pen package dot is feature enabled, and the feature specifically is S Pen, and then we pass in device pen to reference it. Then after we try to initialize the S Pen, we want to catch if an exception was thrown, and the specific exception we're going to be looking for here first is this guy. And let's come back down inside of here and go catch and E, and then we're going to use our SDK class by calling SDKUtils, and then process unsupported exception, pass in our activity, which is this, and then also pass in the exception, which is this very specific S Pen exception, and we're going to see if it's true. If it is, then we're just going to kick out of this. And just to actually show you the SDKUtils, I know I've done this in previous parts of the tutorial. There it is, and this is the actual method that's going to be called. And then basically what it's going to do is it's going to take this exception right here, and then it is going to check the error type. It's going to throw all kinds of different error types. We're then going to check what those error types are, and depending upon which ones there are, we're then going to pop up different alert dialog boxes. So, covered that in massive detail in the very first Samsung Mobile SDK tutorial. So, if you want to really see exactly what's going on there, just go check that out. Okay, so if any exception was triggered other than that exception right there, we also want to catch those. And in those situations, we are going to open up a toast by calling MakeText. We're going to have to pass it the context. There it is. We're going to have to say what the message is. Cannot initialize S Pen. Works for me. And then finally we have to put in a duration for this toast. We have to spell toast right too. And the length is going to be short. This really is the best way to learn how to do just about anything. It's just to keep running over and creating more and more apps using the SDK, and eventually it just all sticks in your head. Like, it's kind of neat. And then we're going to print out a stack trace because we don't know what this error is and it's something that we might want to take a look at. So print that out. And then finally clear memory and kill the application if we get here. And there we are, all set up. Then we're going to want to create our frame layout, which is going to hold the relative layout that we will be drawing on. So frame layout, S Pen, ViewContainer, cast it into a frame layout because I'm going to be calling find view by ID, and specifically we're going to look for that frame layout in our layout. Whoops, that's ID dot, and it's S Pen ViewContainer, ViewContainer, there it is, and there we got it. Throw in our semicolon, and then we're basically going to do the same sort of thing for the frame layout, but so bounce that inside of there. This is going to be the relative layout, S Pen view, and it's called layout, and it's a relative layout. And then it's funny, I clicked on the wrong one. This is just S Pen ViewContainer. Okay, that's fixed. And then this is S Pen view layout. Good thing I caught that. Got rid of that error before it became an error. All right, got those set up. Now we need to create the S Pen setting layout that's going to be used to allow the pen settings to be changed. And to do that, we're just going to go make a reference to it. SettingView is equal to, make sure we give this the right name, pen SettingView. And we just go new S Pen setting pen layout. Need to pass it the context. An image file path in this situation is going to be nothing. And then finally, the relative layout. And there that is. We want to then notify the user if an error occurred whenever we called this guy. And we can do that just by checking if it has the value of null. And if it does, we're just going to create another toast on the screen. And we're just going to say cannot create pen setting view. Everything else there's fine. Well, we can get rid of this because we know what the error is. And everything else there is perfectly fine. Then we're basically going to do the exact same thing for our eraser tool. So let's just copy it. Copy, maybe put in a note eraser, move this up here, paste it in there, call this the eraser setting view. This is going to be eraser layout. Everything else there is exactly the same. Change this to eraser setting view, and then we're going to say cannot create eraser setting view. and everything else is exactly the same. We then want to add the settings windows for both the pen and the eraser to our frame layout, and we can do that just by calling SPen ViewContainer, which is our frame layout, and we add those views by calling add view pen setting view. So that is set in place, and then we're going to do the same thing for the eraser settings, and this is just going to be called eraser. And there we go. My finger got a little crazy. There we are. Got it right. Then let's create the drawing surface on our device by calling SPen surface view new SPen surface view, and to create it we just have to pass it the context, and it handles everything else for us. We definitely want to check to make sure that we were able to create this, and we're going to do that in exactly the same way. Check if it has a null value, and if it does, we're going to open up a toast just like before. Cannot create surface view. That's fine. If we get down here, then we know that we'll be able to add our drawing surface to our relative layout, add view, and then pass in the SPen surface view. We need to set our canvas views for both of these guys, both the pen setting view and the eraser setting view. Set canvas view, and we just pass in the surface view for both of them. Then we need to get some information in regards to our display on our device, or on their device, the user's device. Get that with get window manager, and then call get default display. Create a rect that's going to hold our integer coordinates for us. And you can also see by watching this tutorial exactly the types of things that will stay the same whenever you are working with an application, and the things that are going to be different, which is also very, very useful, because sometimes that's something that's hard to figure out. Pass in the rect to get those coordinates, and now we have them. Then we have to create our SPen NoteDock, and we're going to do this inside of a try block as well, which we very often will do whenever we are messing around with displays. Make sure we catch any errors. NoteDock new SPen NoteDock, pass in our context, use the rect to also pass in our width, and use the rect to also pass in our height. There we go. And anytime we have a try block, of course we're going to want to catch any errors, which this is going to be an IO error more than likely if it is triggered. And what are we going to do? We're going to print out some toasts. So let's just come up here and let's just get them. There we are. Just grab that, come back down inside, paste it in there. Cannot create NoteDock. There we go. And then we're also going to catch a general exception. Let's get rid of that. Change this to E1. Tap that in there. And rather than a toast in this situation, we'll go E1 print stack trace, which is right here. And there we go. And then if we get past this, we know that we had no problem with our NoteDock, so we can add our page to our document, because remember the NoteDock is going to hold a whole bunch of pages. And there that is. If we want to give our page a background, and I'm just using the regular old background that I was provided with, there it is. Clear our undo and redo history, because we're going to be using undo and redo in this application. And then SPen set page doc, SPen page doc, true, which is going to put the SPen document in the current view, and pass true that we want to update our screen. And for now, that is all I'm going to do in this creation of this application. In the next part of the tutorial, I will finish everything up, and you'll know pretty much everything in regards to different ways you can use the SPen and all the other different things that I'm going to be covering. Please leave your questions and comments below. Otherwise, till next time.